I remember the text message as clearly as the smell of stale microwave popcorn in our apartment. It was 1:17 a.m. My phone vibrated, lighting up the ceiling of the tiny room I shared with my college roommate, Mark. The text wasn't from Mark, though. It was from Sarah. Sarah wasn't just Mark's older sister. She was the reason I agreed to live in this cramped, slightly moldy place to begin with. She was the polar opposite of the chaotic energy Mark and I ran on. We were 19, loud, and obsessed with anything that blinked or played a bass line. Sarah, at 26, was quiet, composed, and carried herself with an air of knowing exactly how the world worked, and being slightly disappointed by it. She was the wise one, the successful architect who lived in the spacious, quiet loft right above us. We rarely saw her. She was a ghost of good decisions floating above our messy lives. But the message wasn't a friendly check-in or a complaint about our noise. It was 3 lines, stark against the dark screen. Come upstairs. Right now? But don't knock. My stomach dropped. I knew, instantly, that this wasn't about borrowing a charger or asking for help moving furniture. Sarah didn't ask for help, and she certainly didn't send texts in the middle of the night unless something was deeply wrong. I glanced over at Mark, who was dead asleep, snoring softly beneath a pile of laundry. If this was serious, why didn't she text him? He was her brother. It didn't make sense. But the urgency in her words was undeniable. It was a command, not an invitation. I hesitated for a good 3 minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs, making the silence of the room feel impossibly loud. Every reckless bone in my 19-year-old body was screaming go see what the mystery is. But the rational part, the small, underdeveloped part, was whispering, danger. Walk away. I pictured her apartment, clean, modern, with expensive art on the walls and a perfect view of the city lights. It was a sanctuary. Now, that sanctuary felt like the center of a brewing storm. Was she in trouble? Had something happened to Mark that I didn't know about? No, Mark was right here. The thought of ignoring her felt worse than any risk. Sarah was the kind of person who would never ask for help unless she was truly desperate. She had this protective shell, and the fact that she had punctured it, to me, a virtual stranger, meant the situation was critical. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark. The floorboards were freezing. I grabbed a sweatshirt, realizing my hands were shaking. I crept towards the door. The moment I touched the cold metal of the doorknob, I heard a sharp, almost imperceptible sound from the floor above, a sound that was definitely not Sarah. I froze. Who else was up there with her at 1:17 a.m.? And why was she so insistent that I didn't knock? I slowly opened the door to the dark hallway, knowing that the second I stepped out, there was no turning back, and I was about to walk straight into a secret that could change everything. What I saw when I looked up the narrow, fire escape staircase was a shadow moving in the dim light of her landing, and it definitely wasn't Sarah's. Who was it? And what were they doing on Sarah's landing at this hour? The shadow I saw wasn't moving towards me. It was receding quickly, pulling back from the top of the stairs, disappearing into the darkness of Sarah's open doorway. It was too tall to be Sarah, and too quick to be someone just wandering. It felt like a retreat, like someone who had been caught looking but didn't want to be seen. I crept up the stairs, my cheap sneakers squeaking on the metal steps, a sound that felt deafening in the dead silence of the building. Our relationship, mine and Sarah's, was built on a series of awkward silences and brief, intense glances. I was Ben, the young, naive kid trying to figure out if college was worth the debt, usually seen with a basketball under one arm and a half-finished essay in the other. Sarah was Mark's sister, yes, but she was also the unattainable benchmark of adult success. She'd occasionally bring us homemade cookies, a maternal gesture she probably hated making, and lecture Mark about his grades. To me, she was always polite, reserved, and strangely distant, like a character in a movie I was only allowed to watch through a glass pane. The setup of our lives was the real source of the tension. Mark and I were paying almost nothing for the downstairs unit because it was basically a glorified basement. Sarah owned the building. She had inherited it, fixed up the top floor into that stunning loft, and was trying to run the whole thing as a serious investment. Her life was about structure, portfolios, and 3-ring binders. Mine was about pizza crusts and late-night gaming tournaments. She represented the future I was terrified of, and I probably represented the chaos she'd finally escaped. but there was a subtle undercurrent between us that went beyond landlord and tenant. A few months ago, Mark had gone home for a weekend, and my sink had backed up in a spectacular, catastrophic way. I was useless. Sarah came downstairs, wearing a dress shirt and high heels, took one look, and fixed it in 10 minutes flat, refusing to let me help. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. She just paused at the door, turned, and looked at me. A long, searching look that felt like she was assessing my entire life choices. Then she simply said, "Don't let this apartment make you sloppy, Ben." It wasn't advice, it was a warning. And that was the last non-essential thing we'd said to each other until this text. I reached the top landing. The door to her immaculate apartment was slightly ajar, just enough to let a thin line of warm, yellow light spill onto the landing. I could hear nothing. Not the distant city noise, not her movements, nothing. It was too quiet. The air itself felt thick and wrong. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, gently, remembering her cardinal rule, don't knock. The first thing I noticed wasn't Sarah. It was a single, expensive-looking glass on her perfectly polished kitchen counter, shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. And then I saw the trail of something dark leading away from it. But where was Sarah, and what did that broken glass mean? I stepped fully inside, my senses on high alert. The shattered glass on the pristine marble counter caught the light like scattered diamonds, and the dark trail, I realized with a sickening jolt, was wine. Expensive, dark red wine, spreading across the white floor like a slow, bleeding injury. The whole scene felt like a struggle had just ended, or perhaps was only just paused. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice cracking slightly. The apartment was flawless except for the violent chaos in the kitchen. Her living room, which usually felt like a magazine spread, was strangely untouched. Then I heard it, a faint, muffled sound, like a gasp, coming from the back hallway, near the bedroom. I moved past the kitchen, my focus locked on the dark stains spreading across the floor. This was no spilled drink. This was a mess that implied panicked movement. I realized that the shadow I saw earlier must have been the person who caused the breakage, or who she was trying to get away from. But if they left, why did she text me, and why was she hiding? I reached the doorway to the back wing of the loft. The air here was colder, and a different smell permeated the space. Not wine, but a sharp, metallic tang that made my stomach clench. I pushed the door open, revealing the long hallway leading to her bedroom and office. That's when I saw her. Sarah was pressed tightly into the corner between a large bookshelf and a coat rack, practically invisible against the dark wall, except for the moonlight catching the whites of her eyes. She wasn't just hiding. She was shaking, her sophisticated composure completely gone, replaced by raw, paralyzing fear. Her hand was clamped over her mouth, and she held a letter opener, a thin, silver blade, like a dagger. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with a relief that quickly morphed back into terror. She didn't speak. She just gave a series of small, frantic gestures, finger to her lips, aggressively demanding silence. Then, she pointed down the hallway, toward her closed bedroom door. Her fear was contagious. I knew, without her saying a word, that whoever I saw retreating up the stairs hadn't actually left. They were still here, inside the apartment, separated from us by a single, thin wooden door. And then, from behind that closed door, I heard the faint, measured sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and moving towards us. We were trapped in the narrow hallway, and whoever was in the bedroom was about to step out. The sound of those footsteps stopped my breathing entirely. They weren't heavy or clumsy like Mark's or mine. They were calculated, the rhythmic tread of someone who knew exactly where they were and what they were looking for. Sarah's grip on the letter opener tightened until her knuckles were white. Her eyes pleaded with me. Asterisk, do something, but don't make a sound, star. I realized I couldn't just stand there. My mind raced through the options: run, hide, or confront. Running meant leaving her, which I couldn't do. Hiding felt useless. I had to create a distraction, a way for her to get out, or at least a way for us to figure out who was behind that door. I slowly, painstakingly, reached into the pocket of my sweatshirt and pulled out my phone. The screen was black, thankfully, but my fingers fumbled to open the text app. I had to communicate with her, but every tap, every slight movement, felt like setting off a firework in the terrifying silence. I managed to type a single, short message to her, knowing she'd see the vibration. "Who is it?" She glanced down, her pupils dilated with fear, then up at me. She mouthed a single word, one that made absolutely no sense. Asterisk him. Asterisk him could be anyone. Her ex-boyfriend? A disgruntled client? But the sheer terror in her eyes suggested something far more dangerous. Just as I was about to ask another question, the footsteps started again, slightly faster this time, and the doorknob to the bedroom began to turn. Slowly, we both froze, rigid against the wall. This was it. The moment of confrontation. I felt a surge of adrenaline, and the reckless 19-year-old took over. I needed to draw attention away from Sarah, who was pinned in the corner. In one smooth, quiet movement, I backed up a step, pressed the emergency volume button on my phone, and hurled it. Not toward the door, but toward the living room, crashing it into a towering metal sculpture she kept near the window. The resulting clang was deafening, a desperate, metallic scream that shattered the silence. The immediate effect was what I needed. The turning of the doorknob stopped. The footsteps inside the room reversed, rushing toward the living room, toward the noise. In here, a voice bellowed, deep and gravelly. I heard a crash. There in the main room. Sarah instantly grabbed my arm, pulling me hard into the shadows of the coat rack. The person inside had not only heard the crash, but had also reacted to it with an almost police-like command. This wasn't a scared burglar. This was someone organized, someone looking for something, or someone specific. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes were no longer panicked. They were focused, radiating a dangerous resolve. She leaned close, her breath hot against my ear, and whispered 3 words that instantly redefined every single thing I thought I knew about her. He's the detective. The detective? Why would Sarah be hiding from a detective, and what was he looking for in her locked bedroom? My mind reeled. A detective? Was she involved in a crime? All the pieces clicked into place. The shattered glass, the urgent, secretive text, the retreat of the shadow, and now, the professional command in that voice. What did you do? I whispered, utterly bewildered. I was now an accomplice to a fugitive, hiding in the dark. Sarah ignored the question. She only had time for action. She pointed toward the back of the hallway again, past the bedroom where the detective was now methodically searching. There was a seldom-used utility closet back there. The building's blueprint, she breathed, her voice barely audible. I designed this place. There's a hatch. Get to the roof. But before I could even process that, she grabbed my face, forcing me to look at her. Her expression was tortured, desperate, but truthful. The first time I saw you, Ben, she said, her voice trembling, you reminded me of my brother, the one I lost. I wasn't helping you because of Mark. I was helping you because I needed a witness. Wait, she lost a brother? I thought Mark was her only brother. I looked back at the shattered wine glass, then at the frantic fear in her eyes, and realized the chilling, impossible truth. She hadn't sent me the text to hide from the detective. She had texted me to witness something, and the detective wasn't looking for her. He was looking for the evidence she was trying to destroy. But what evidence was worth hiding from the police, and what really happened to her other brother? The detective's heavy steps were now thudding back down the hallway. He was closer than ever, his shadow stretching long and menacingly toward us in the dim light. I couldn't dwell on the revelation of her lost brother. The stakes were too high, too immediate. She needed a witness, and I was it. Go. The hatch is above the laundry chute, she urged, shoving me toward the utility closet. I bolted, throwing open the closet door. It smelled faintly of bleach and dust. I scrambled over a basket of laundry, found the metal ring for the roof access panel, and pulled. It resisted, groaning loudly as it opened. Just as I hauled myself up into the narrow, dark void, the detective rounded the corner. He stopped dead, seeing Sarah in the corner and the open hatch above the laundry chute. Drop the knife, Sarah. His voice was cold, official. And don't bother. He can't get away. This whole place is surrounded. Sarah slowly let the silver letter opener clatter to the floor. He's not escaping anything, detective, she said, her voice surprisingly steady now. He's recording. I fumbled in the dark space, pulling out my second, older phone I always kept charged for emergencies. I hadn't thrown the primary one in the living room. I had thrown a decoy. The real phone, the backup, was now aimed down into the hallway, the tiny lens capturing the entire, horrifying scene. You said you didn't see anything at the scene, Sarah, the detective pressed, taking a slow step forward. The files are gone. The wine was destroyed. You're withholding information about the accident. It wasn't an accident, Sarah whispered, tears finally tracing clean lines through the dirt on her face. My brother, David, the one you're investigating for the missing funds, he wasn't killed in a car wreck. You killed him. I saw you leave the apartment that night, just before the fire. The detective paused, a flicker of true, unmasked panic crossing his face. It wasn't the reaction of a good cop. It was the reaction of a terrified criminal. He reached into his jacket. You're hysterical, he said, pulling out a small, black object. You need to come with me. Now. But as he raised the object, a taser, Sarah didn't flinch. She just gave me a tiny, affirmative nod. I finally understood the second twist. She didn't text me to escape the detective, but to trap him. I had come upstairs to help a woman hide a secret, but I was about to expose a detective who was a killer. And the final, shocking realization? The text message wasn't just to me. She'd also copied Mark on it, ensuring her real brother, the one who was safely asleep downstairs, would get the complete, time-stamped video evidence I was currently capturing the moment I hit the send button. The blue light of the taser flared, but the video was already gone, sent to her brother, the one I thought was sleeping safely downstairs. The flash of the taser hit Sarah's shoulder, and she crumpled instantly, the sudden, violent current dropping her to the floor. The detective didn't even look at her. He pivoted, his eyes fixed on the open hatch above. He started scrambling toward the utility closet, his breath ragged, realizing too late that his professional composure had cracked, and the whole confession was now flying across the digital ether. I didn't wait. I yanked the phone back up into the hatch, my hands shaking violently, and slammed the metal panel shut, dropping the locking pin just as his hand slapped the underside of the hatch. The muffled roar of his frustration vibrated through the metal, but I knew I was safe, at least for a moment. I was on the roof, the cold night air hitting my face, staring up at the vast, uncaring city skyline. I got the phone working immediately. The timestamp showed the video sent to Mark 12 seconds earlier. I sent it again, this time to the police tip line, attaching a simple text, footage of detective, redacted name, confessing to the murder of David, Sarah's brother. Loft 4A, address. I hit send, then dropped the phone into the nearest drainage trough. If they found me, they wouldn't find the evidence. Minutes later, the sound of sirens started to climb the walls of the building, a frantic, rising wail that signaled the end of the secret. I watched from the edge of the roof as police cars swarmed the street, their blue and red lights painting the windows of Sarah's perfect loft in chaos. Mark and I saw Sarah 3 days later. She was bruised but defiant, released on the basis of being a victim who was trying to expose a corrupt officer. She didn't come to our apartment. We went up to hers. She was sitting in the immaculate living room, the broken glass finally cleaned up. The first thing she did was apologize for tossing me, a moment of dry humor that felt deeply human. She explained everything. David, her younger brother, had been investigating the detective for money laundering, not embezzlement. The detective had silenced David and staged it as a drunk driving accident, destroying the evidence in David's apartment first. Sarah knew the truth. She inherited the apartment building, realizing the killer was still out there, possibly watching. She had spent months trying to find tangible proof that wouldn't put her in danger, but when the detective finally showed up, breaking in to finish destroying the final, tiny piece of evidence, the Weinstein files, she panicked and texted the only person close enough to be a witness who wasn't her other brother. She had chosen me, the reckless kid who wouldn't hesitate, over Mark, the sensitive one she wanted to protect. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to step into the dark without knowing why, she said, looking straight at me, a tiny, genuine smile playing on her lips. Thank you, Ben. You were young and reckless. I was wise and broken. But together, we found justice. The whole experience changed everything. Mark, Sarah, and I formed an unspoken bond that transcended the simple roommate/landlord relationship. The distance was gone. We knew each other's secrets now. I learned that even the most put-together people carry the deepest wounds, and that recklessness, sometimes, is just courage without the context. I stopped seeing her as just Mark's older sister, and started seeing her as Sarah, the resilient architect who lost one brother but saved another. I finally understood why she told me not to knock. It wasn't just to stay quiet. It was because the moment I chose to open that door, I wasn't just walking into her apartment. I was walking into her life and becoming the essential piece of her carefully planned trap. But the biggest question remained, one that always lingered when I looked at her, and one that she still refused to answer. She had texted me, the stranger, but why was the message sent from her other brother's forgotten burner phone, the one David had used for his investigation? Why did she keep that detail from the police?